well, there you go. There's part of the press conference with Gareth Southgate and Harry Kane too, ahead of the match tomorrow, the semi-final. I believe we are now going to go to Chris Scudder, sports journalist who's out in Germany for us. Chris, thank you very much indeed. What did we learn from that press conference then?
Nothing much has changed. I mean, it's business as usual. I mean, that media conference was longer than they normally are on the day before a game. Normally, the players just don't want to do it. It's all answers by numbers and all the rest of the stuff. And let's go and let's have a rest. But I thought that last answer from Gareth Southgate was very interesting. It really summed up where England are. It just feels there's a lot of control around what doing, and they feel very comfortable in their own skins, despite all the, as he said there early in the talk, that external noise and the expectation, which has been, you know, the reason why we've seen all this criticism, really. As he said earlier today, but, you know, he just shuts it out, knows what they've got to do. You pretty much got the impression there from Harry Kane that he is going to be playing tomorrow as captain, that Foden and Bellingham will be there again, despite the fact they haven't really worked together very well. And, you know, it's all very measured, and they know exactly what they've got to do. They've all done it. You know, this is the third semi-final in the Southgate era. So, you know, it's as simple as that, and you can never second guess what's going to happen in the game. As he said there, I mean, something happens, you get a late goal, and then you think on your feet, and then you make the changes. So, I mean, he is exactly as he was before, and it's, you know, he's been there, not done it yet, but I mean, he's right about that making history, getting to a final outside of England. But I'll tell you what, and I don't mean this to be on a downer, England's record, England have never won a knockout match away from England against one of the big nations ever in their history. And when I say the big nations, I'm talking Brazil, Argentina, France, Spain, Italy, Holland, Germany, the big ones. Never won a knockout match away from home, if you like. So something's got to change, but, you know, it feels like this is the time. And, you know, they've had two come from behind victories in the space of a week. And before that, there were only two in the space of England's history. So things are changing. It's a very together squad. They're all quite relaxed. And I'm optimistic, I think.
Yes, you do sound cautiously optimistic. They were also asked about this German referee, and it seems as though nothing to worry on that front about.
No, it's a story. It's 20 years old, really. But I mean, the reason it's come to light, the referee who was banned for 6 months not for match fixing, but because he accepted money from somebody who was banned for life, a referee. Investigation found that he'd taken some money. So two and two together, he said he didn't do anything wrong. But it just happens to be that referee is in charge tomorrow. And it's the same referee that Jude Bellingham, after a German Bundesliga match 3 years ago, when Jude was only 18, they had a fallout. There was a penalty given and Bellingham didn't like it. And after the game, he was asked by a reporter what he thought of the referee. And he said something like, well, when you've been match fixing, what do you expect? And that got him fined 40,000 euros. So, you know, there was a good question from the floor there. You know, is that going to be, is it weigh on Bellingham's mind? Is he going to be worried about getting booked or sent off? Is the referee going to be affected by it? But, you know, it's a valid talking point, and it's happening in the very same stadium where that incident with Bellingham and the referee happened. It's Bellingham's former home ground in Germany, in Dortmund, where he really made his name on the international stage. So yeah, I think, you know, Southgate he does brush things off. As what I think the Norwegian reporter asked him about Marcelo Bielsa, why don't you play more attractive football? And he just batted it away, saying I didn't know the context. He didn't want to answer it, and he wasn't going to. They're not going to change.
Well, there you go. I'm hopeful too. I think it's going to be a win tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for bringing us the latest from Germany. Chris Scudder there. Now, coming up on the rest of the show, I'm standing in for Michelle Dewberry this evening, as you can see. Today marks the first day of the new Parliament, of course. Keir Starmer started the day meeting with all the regional mayors to discuss their plan for devolution. I'm asking, should mayors have more power? Perhaps you think they have too much already. And Starmer's set to make his first appearance on the world stage ahead of the NATO summit in Washington. What will he say? What will he do? Will he have an impact? And Nigel Farage, of course, made his debut in the Commons in true Nigel Farage fashion. We'll show you a clip from that. It's an exciting show. But first, the news headlines with Polly.
Emily, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, MPs have been sworn in as Labour ministers who sit on the front benches for the first time in 14 years today, with the new session of Parliament well underway. 643 MPs gathering ahead of Parliament's state opening. Sir Keir Starmer speaking for the first time at the dispatch box as Prime Minister.
Now, as in any new Parliament, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to put an end to a politics that has too often seemed self-serving and self-obsessed, and to replace that politics of performance with the politics of service. Because service is a precondition for hope and trust, and the need to restore trust should weigh heavily on every member here, new and returning alike. We all have a duty to show that politics can be a force for good. So whatever our political differences, it's now time to turn the page, unite in a common endeavour of national renewal, and make this new Parliament a Parliament of service.
Sir Keir Starmer, well, in response to that, Rishi Sunak, now the Leader of the Opposition, congratulated Sir Keir.
Can I start by congratulating the Prime Minister on his election victory, and as he takes on his formidable task, he and his family deserve the good wishes of all of us in this House. Now, in our politics, we can argue vigorously, as the Prime Minister and I did over the past 6 weeks, but still respect each other. And whatever disputes we may have in this Parliament, I know that everyone in this House will not lose sight of the fact that we are all motivated by our desire to serve our constituents, our country, and advance the principles that we honourably believe in.
Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak, there. Now, news away from politics. Pay negotiations between England's junior doctors and the new government have ended, with representatives of the British Medical Association saying the talks were constructive. 11 strikes over the last 20 months have caused widespread disruption to millions of hospital appointments. And the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has previously said he wouldn't agree to demands for a 35% pay rise. But BMA negotiators sounded a positive note at the end of today's talks.
You know, this meeting was definitely a positive step, but I don't think we can place a value or a certainty on how quickly things are going to take to resolve, or what might need to happen to make things resolve. This was definitely a collaborative talk, and I think it's fair to say we have no plans at the moment to call for strike action.
3 asylum seekers have ended their High Court legal action after the government scrapped the Rwanda deportation scheme. Lawyers for the migrants, who can't be named, were told today their cases would no longer proceed to court. According to the Home Office, their legal costs will now be covered by the taxpayer, and that comes after the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, branded the Rwanda policy a con. Meanwhile, just a day after the first Channel migrants arrived since the new Labour government took power, more small boats are crossing the English Channel today. GB News can confirm more than 300 illegal migrants were picked up from the Channel. 4 Border Force vessels and a lifeboat arrived in Dover Harbour throughout the morning. At least 6 dinghies making their way across the English Channel despite worsening weather conditions there. Labour has vowed to end the small boats crisis by going after the criminal gangs which organise the crossings. 4 men have been stabbed in a series of unprovoked attacks in less than a week in West London. Detectives have now released a CCTV still of the suspect knife man after the victims were left with significant injuries. All the attacks took place in the Hayes area of West London. Detectives saying the suspect is a muscular black man, about 35 years old, with straight dark hair, wearing dark clothes. Dyson is cutting up to 1,000 jobs as part of a global restructuring programme for the company. The Wiltshire-based appliance manufacturer employs around 3,500 people across the UK and is best known perhaps for the invention of the bagless vacuum cleaner, as well as innovative cooling fans and hairstyling products. And as if you didn't know, the England squad has been training ahead of their Euro 2024 semi-final tomorrow. Gareth Southgate's side will face the Netherlands at the Signal Iduna Park in Dortmund. All 26 players took part this lunchtime in that training session ahead of making the trip from their Blankenheim base, from where we've just seen that press conference a short while ago. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, a very good evening to you. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. I am standing in, of course, for Michelle this evening. And joining me in the studio until 7 o'clock is my wonderful panel. The former Labour councillor and political commentator Tom Buick and the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. We've got a lot to talk about today. It's been a big day in Britain, in Parliament, particularly in the House of Commons. And as ever, I want all of your views at home as well. Please do get them in gbnews.com/your say. We've got a lot to talk about, and I want to talk about a number of things. We had Reform taking their seats in Parliament, all 5 of them. The famous 5 is what they're calling themselves, the Reform 5. Will they cause a bit of a stir? Nigel Farage already made his speech, didn't he, with a little bit of a sarky comment about the former Speaker, John Bercow, didn't he? I also want to know what you make of Labour's plans for mayors, giving more powers, potentially, to the mayors across this great country. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a bad idea? Are you indifferent? But yes, today a new parliament begun, and it began with these talks with 12 regional mayors to discuss this major programme of devolution. What exactly does it mean in practice? Could it see local authorities take over more responsibility for public transport, infrastructure, skills, funding? What might it mean for tax and bureaucracy? Do mayors already have too much power? Let's have a little look.
I think there is a fundamental understanding that we need to take more power out of Whitehall and Westminster, bring it closer to people where they live, so that those with skin in the game get to have more say over their own future.
Right, there's one mayor with her view. But Ben Habib, what do you reckon? Because I'm always sceptical about even the concept of devolution. It was supposed to, Ben, wasn't it? It was supposed to keep us united as a country, and I feel instead it's made us more fragmented. Is that fair?
I completely agree. It was sold by Tony Blair as the mechanism by which to silence the voices of separatism, particularly in Scotland. But actually what it's done is fuel separatism. It's given a platform to separatism. Thankfully, the SNP, I mean, one of the really brilliant things from the last election was seeing the SNP utterly destroyed at the ballot box. But it is a vast number of people being paid a vast amount of money in order to hold forth on subjects on which they mostly won't be tested, demanding ever greater sums of money from Westminster. When things don't work, it's Westminster's fault. If it does work, it's all their, it's all to their credit. I can't see why you would intersperse a whole load of effectively middle management into the United Kingdom, who can only really justify themselves by being detractors of the United Kingdom. We've seen that in Scotland. We see it in spades in Northern Ireland, where the First Minister of Northern Ireland actually won't even condemn IRA terrorism. And Sinn Féin won't take their seats in Westminster. That's how much they hold the union in contempt. So how Tony Blair thought that could be anything other than a destructive force for the United Kingdom is beyond me. And one of the things about Tony Blair, just moving on marginally but staying on the subject, is that he created lots of these forms of devolved authority, independent bodies, which I think have been the abuse of our democratic process in this country. Ofcom, which regulates you guys. The Electoral Commission, which regulates elections. We don't need that. We have laws which govern how elections should be held. We don't need a black box of unaccountable people determining how it should go. And then, of course, you've got the OBR, without whose blessing the Chancellor of the Exchequer can no longer make financial decisions. And then that's before you even get to all the host of international institutions and international treaties through which our democracy has been further dumbed down. Devolution, mayoralties, all these interspersing of good-for-nothing, highly paid, pointless individuals has just dumbed down the governance of this country, damaged it greatly and undermined our democracy. We need power. We need power back where it should be, in Westminster. I want our politicians to be accountable to us, not so that they can blame some international body or some independent body or the devolved authorities. I want to know who the hell got it wrong so I can hold them to account.
A very strong opening speech. Wasn't that from Ben? Tom, may I just say, this is what Labour are good at, isn't it? Creating institutions, making huge constitutional reform that you don't necessarily see the impact of. Well, you do see the impact of immediately, but you see further consequences down the line, don't you?
Well, Labour haven't been in power for the last 14 years.
No,
and
but
we've seen no
mentioning what Blair
delivery.
did.
Well, you know, I always love following Ben when I can eventually follow him, sort of wind him up and watch him go. Absolutely fantastic peroration. He should have been at the opening of Parliament today.
Was that a bit catty, Tom?
No. I've got great respect for Ben, as he well knows.
And mutual respect.
Yes, indeed. Now, look, on this point, first of all, about quangos, you know, the idea that the quango state was only invented with New Labour isn't quite correct. I think the real issue here, which comes to the central point about devolution, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? The truth is, Britain is one of the most centralised countries in the G7. Only 5% of tax revenues, for example, are raised locally. Now, some of that's historical, goes back as far as 1066 and the Doomsday.
But they're not talking about tax-raising measures, are they?
Well, Ben mentioned Scotland, and actually, I think he sort of answered his own critique in a way, because the Scottish Nationalist Party have just been reduced to a rump in the Westminster Parliament. And the reason why they've been reduced, apart from the fact they still keep on going on about the independence referendum, which I don't think has any traction north of the border, but it's the fact that they haven't delivered on the things that they are responsible for in Hollywood. They have not delivered on education. Scotland used to have one of the best education systems in the world. It's gone down the pan since the Scottish Nationalists taken over. The healthcare system, the infrastructure, they get 20% on average more public funding per head in Scotland, yet they still can't deliver the public services that people demand.
And who did Nicola Sturgeon blame when things didn't go as smoothly as she wanted?
But I think this is as
she
much...
She blamed central government, didn't she?
But in federal... So take Canada, which has a very similar parliamentary system to ourselves. It has a House of Commons, it doesn't have a House of Lords, it has a Senate. 50% of resources and decision-making in a federal Canada take place in the provinces. It's the provincial premiers that have responsibility for education, for health, for transport and infrastructure. I would have thought, Ben, you know, particularly since we both share this background of taking back control from a technocracy in Brussels, the challenge for Britain is we've got, frankly, that Brussels mindset in our central government departments. It's the Whitehall knows best mindset. And I think if we could break that rationality and get out to the regions, let's give Andy Burnham and Ben Houchen a go.
Theoretically, devolution, and everyone learns about what devolution is if they do their A-level politics or whatever, GCSE politics, you learn about it in theory and you go through the pros and the cons. In practice, very different.
Not just theory, though, it works.
Often what happens with mayors is that they constantly want more powers, right? Take Sadiq Khan. He wants the power to impose rent controls. Might sound nice to some, but disastrous in practice.
I mean, Sadiq Khan is a great example of why we shouldn't have a mayor. There's nothing he's done to which I can point and say that was an unmitigated success. Most of what he's done is an absolute disaster. Take Crossrail. 3 years late, $5 billion over budget. Take the police, knife crime up by 30%.
Well, you could say the same about HS2, couldn't you?
Both those examples, Ben.
But can I just finish? Yeah. And when he's challenged on it, what he says is, it's not my fault, it's the Police and Crimes Commissioner, or it's central government, or it's the Minister for London, or my hands were tied because I didn't get enough money for TfL. The man is a walking, irresponsible disaster zone for London, and he shouldn't be anywhere near the mayoralty. And why do we have a Minister for London, Tom? Why do we have a Minister for London?
Why do we have disproportionately so many MPs from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, whereas English MPs cannot vote, for example, on health and education that affects UK citizens in other parts of this country? I don't think your argument really...
So would you like an English assembly?
Well, no, I wouldn't. But I don't think Ben's argument is really actually about, you know, he's against devolution.
Hang on, you're fine with devolution to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, but not to England?
If you look at the results of recent elections, going right back to the 2016 referendum, people feel distant from their political leaders. They don't feel, like, to use that horrible term, they have any agency over their lives.
We have MPs, don't we?
Actually, what I'd like to see is double devolution. I think we need to get more power and responsibility from Whitehall to the Town Hall, and we need to get power and resources out from the Town Hall into local communities.
I just don't get it, Tom. We've got 650 constituencies in the UK. That's a fairly broad representation of every constituent part of the United Kingdom. We've got local authorities, district councils. All of these entities look after their locality. Why do we need to intersperse even more authority For me, running it if I were looking at it as a CEO of a company, as a business, I would get rid of all this middle management. It's just a waste of money.
But let's just give you a very practical example.
Recipe for corruption. The accountability can just be passed to whoever you want it to be. And I just wonder whether it's value for money for the taxpayer. I mean, John says devolution is disaster. Check what's happened in Scotland. Divided country, massive waste of time and money. Elizabeth, no way should the mayors get more power. Burnham has done enough damage to Greater Manchester. Elizabeth, I will say that quite a few people got in touch earlier today to say that they think Andy Burnham has done a good job. But John says, why do mayors need powers? Just a layer of bureaucracy that isn't needed. I mean, I wouldn't mind mayors who just did nice things, like cut ribbons at the local hospital or
and there are those
library.
ceremonial mayors across our local authorities. But the whole point of having executive mayors, and I've been, by the way, as a local councillor in a cabinet responsible for children's services. What really frustrated me, that was, I was responsible for education, 70 schools in Brighton and Hove. I wanted to merge, but I wanted to merge sixth forms because the inefficiency of having small sixth forms in the locality when we had one major general FE college, and I was told by the council officers, no, that's not a power that we had as councillors. We had to refer that to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State in Whitehall, we've got 24,000 schools in this country, and we got to refer to the Education Secretary every time.
But
local people want to do something with the education system.
We're going to come back to this, so hold your thought, Ben, because we do need to go to a break. We're going to continue on this a little bit more because lots of you have been getting in touch about the strong feelings on the issue of mayors having more powers. We're also going to be talking about 90,000 asylum seekers who were set to be removed to Rwanda. They're now going to be processed for asylum in the UK. What exactly is going on here? James Cleverly has accused Labour of wanting, essentially, an amnesty. Is that right? Stay with us.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I'm joined by showbiz journalist Steph Tetchy and the author Suze Holder. Welcome to you both. Ladies, right, what's top of the menu? What we got?
Oh, well, we've got this story about Elvis Presley and his blue suede shoes, Susan.
Yes, well, I am a huge, huge Elvis fan.
Me too.
And if I don't get home and find those blue suede shoes kind of wrapped up for me, waiting for me, but they did go for £120,000, so possibly they won't be waiting for me, but oh my goodness, what a thing that somebody has actually managed to get those. So, yeah, so Elvis is obviously famous for a lot of things, but he did bring blue suede shoes out in the 1950s. He wore these shoes and they were auctioned at a place in Devizes yesterday. So I do just think it's key memorabilia for somebody who's an Elvis fan. There is an Elvis exhibition, do you know, at the moment. Have you been to that yet?
No, where is it?
You should get yourself down there. It's at London Bridge, and lots of things from Graceland are actually on exhibition there. So the blue suede shoes won't be there because they'll be. We don't know who's bought them.
owner.
Somebody will have bought them. But his gold suit, which is also a very, very famous thing. He had a foil gold suit.
Is that there at this display?
It's at.
How's Graceland? Is it good?
I'd live there. Do you know what it is? It's an amazing place because you can visit so many places that people have been, or like you go to the White House, lots of presidents have been there, or you go to other places. This is a home. And although it's kind of wacky, crazy, amazing, it does feel like a family home. There's not many places you can visit that is so connected to a person.
Elvis Presley, blue suede shoes. If you're minted, 120 grand for a pair of those, that's a snip.
I think it is. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought they would have gone for millions.
Same here. Yeah, and they are authenticated. They were given away by Elvis. He gave away an awful lot of things. He gave it to one of his guys, one of the Memphis Mafia, Alan Fortas.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, this evening. And still with me, Ben Habib and Tom Bjork. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Lots of you getting in touch about the idea of mayors getting more power under this new Labour government. Mike says, here we go, more power to mayors, already positioning himself, Starmer, to be able to pass the buck. It's a spineless move. Is that fair, Ben?
I think there's a really good point in that. You know, central government is equally guilty of blaming everyone other than themselves. When we were a member of the European Union, they were always blamed Brussels. The minute we left, they blamed the civil service. For goodness sake, they're in charge of the civil service. Get a grip, man. It's completely useless. No, I want power vested back in Westminster. I want Westminster to be the accountable democratic entity which all of us in this country can look to and say, you screwed up. I don't want them to be able to say it's this entity or that entity or Nicola Sturgeon or Hamza Yousaf or whatever his name is, and Michelle O'Neill. It's got to rest with them in Westminster. The 650 we just returned the other day.
I mean, there's a lot of them. Some would say we've got far too many people in the Commons. Tom, too many chefs spoil the broth, surely.
With power comes responsibility. As Lord Acton famously said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'll just leave you with this one fact, because I know you want to move on, Emily, to the next debate, and that is this, that advanced nations with the highest amount of fiscal decentralisations all have a higher national income than Britain. So there's something we're not doing right.
I can't fact-check you on that.
Well, we've had mayors. We've had mayors, and we've also had devolution.
Toothless, powerless.
Yeah, I'll let everyone be the judge of whether it's been a success or not. But yes, let's move on to the next debate. Thank you, Tom, for being so genteel about it. The Prime Minister's spokesman has indicated that Labour will allow more than 100,000 illegal migrants to apply for asylum. Now, 90,000 of these were previously set to be removed under the previous government's Rwanda scheme. So are Labour starting as they mean to go on when it comes to migration? Ben, I'll start with you on this. James Cleverly, and now the Shadow Home Secretary, is accusing Labour of essentially wanting an amnesty here, planning an amnesty of sorts. I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he? Is that what's happening here?
Well, there was an effective amnesty under the Conservative government. You know, Rwanda was nothing other than a performative scheme to distract the electorate while, actually nothing got better. You know, remember, we were paying under the Conservatives, we were paying £50,000 per head, per annum, per illegal migrant. I mean, that is huge. That added up to $5.5 billion last year. No wonder they want to come to this country. An individual in this country would have to earn close to £100,000 a year in order to get the benefits that the migrants were getting. Talk about an economic pull. Rwanda was always rubbish. £400 million spent on a scheme that was bound to be interfered with by the European Court of Justice, an exclusion that the wonderful Suella Braverman said she would make in the Illegal Migration Act, but even though it featured in the bill, there was no exclusion on the ECHR when the Act came to pass. The bill was drafted saying that anyone entering this country illegally would be detained and deported. When the Act came into being, it said they may be detained and deported. Big difference in wording. There was never going to be a result. There's only one way to stop illegal migration, and that is to stop people trying to enter our territory illegally. Border enforcement is a physical process which has, for thousands of years, taken place at the border. People used to understand that principle, that if you seek to enter someone's country illegally, you will be turned around physically. And that's what we need to do in the Channel. We need to develop the means to do it.
Well, Tom, it's very easy for the Labour Party in opposition to say, oh, this Rwanda scheme, it's inhumane, it's far too costly, it's inefficient, it's not going to work anyway. It's much harder when you face exactly the same problem. We know that about 300 people have already crossed today on the Channel. This problem is not going anywhere. It may well get far worse than we've seen already. And at the moment, smash the gangs is the policy.
we've got a new government. They've been in power for less than a week. They have a strategy, just like the last government did, but we know that Rishi Sunak called that election early because he knew that he was never in a cat and house chance going to get a so-called illegal migrant onto one of those planes. Those people have now been released. Labour has a plan to smash the gangs, and Yvette Cooper's already set up the border command.
I mean, you know as well as I do that we already had a very similar organisation.
The point is the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary.
It's a rebrand of four domestic organisations.
But the point is, we had an election. The Home Secretaries before Yvette Cooper failed, along with the previous Prime Ministers, to get illegal migration and net migration down in this country. So there's nowhere to hide, is there, for this incoming Home Secretary? The boats are coming in. We get the numbers, we get the tallies. Huge number actually came in, as you said, Emily, in the last 24 hours. So if there isn't a trajectory of downward arrivals from across the Channel, that will be evidence that the smashing the criminal gangs strategy is not working. So I think we've got to give Labour the chance, because, Ben, in quite rightly, your diagnosis of the Tory failings on this, performative politics, costing us hundreds of millions of pounds, frankly, a gimmick. And as for having 100,000 people who are effectively we've made stateless, currently roaming our streets, undocumented, I think Labour's response to that is just outright pragmatic. Do you want undocumented people, potentially some of them could be criminals, roaming our streets? We need to get them documented,
yes, we're not getting
know who
any...
they are, and process their claims.
We're not getting any of that £270 million back. The Rwanda government have been very...
into the command.
Pardon?
We've saved £200 million that will go into the command.
OK, well, this command, there's a lot riding on this command centre, which does, to me, sound like rather a lot like a rebrand of something we already have. But, Ben, this is the difficulty, though. One thing that is very hard to get Yvette Cooper on, and we spoke to her a couple of times in the run-up to the vote in this general election, what to do with those who have gone through the asylum system, and apparently these 100,000 or so will be going through the asylum system, having their claims looked at. The ones who don't have their claim accepted, who are deemed to be illegal migrants who have no case to be here under asylum, what happens to them? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, isn't it, Ben? Because it's hard to send people back to many countries.
Well, you've got to have a deal
world.
with the country to which you wish to send them.
Which is near impossible in many cases.
If they're coming from Afghanistan, you can't deport them.
No, because, because that's a country that's just come out of war. It's not even internationally recognised government, and we know what the Taliban does to its people. But let's just give another example. We've got 100,000, claims are not processed. I don't know what the proportion is because the government doesn't publish these figures, but we know that some of those people will be from, for example, Bangladesh. Safe country. Britain has good diplomatic relations with Bangladesh. We should be able to deport those people if it turns out they don't have a viable claim to be here. But we won't.
We won't, because we don't have the political will or inclination to do it. And nor does the Labour... I mean, the Labour Party definitely doesn't have the will to do it. The way they're going to deal with the asylum backlog is to wave it all through. I was going to say to you, of course, we can have the intellectual debate about where you deport people to, because it's going to be difficult to do it. But that's a theoretical debate. You actually have to wish to deport someone before you hit that problem.
So you don't think, because, you know, Labour do point to their record when they were last in office, and they say, we deported tens of thousands. Have things changed in terms of international law, in terms of all the restrictions we have, etc., etc.?
I'll tell you what happened under
the immigration...
Labour. We had a war in Iraq, which resulted in a spike in illegal migration. And as that war settled down and Iraq settled, the illegal migration settled. It has nothing to do with policies adopted by Labour back then.
Deportations, though? Were higher than they have been under the Conservatives.
Maybe we were able to deport people to Iraq because actually we controlled Iraq back in those days. But the other thing is there wasn't a Schengen zone in place back in the early 2000s. Yeah. And the Schengen zone... People keep saying we've left the EU, we've lost the ability to deport people back to the EU under the Dublin Agreement. Actually, the Schengen zone is the single largest contributor to illegal movement of people across Europe.
Well, that is true because it's an open borders system. Yeah. But all I was saying, actually, I think you're going to be surprised in terms of Labour Home Secretaries. You look back at David Blunkett, at Charles Clarke, even Tony Blair, of course, who's been on the airwaves and in the papers today about warning, actually, Labour to be tough on illegal and legal
he fears reform.
Migration. But actually, back in 2007, it was Tony Blair who was saying we need to change the UN Convention on refugees.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Tony Blair was very comfortable with mass immigration.
People in. But that's a separate issue about the accession 8 countries of the European Union.
That is true. That is true. Gary just says, has he stopped the gangs yet? Not yet, Gary, but we live in hope. Anyway, coming up, we'll be hearing from Keir Starmer as he's set to make his first appearance on the world stage ahead of the NATO summit in Washington. Stay tuned. It might be interesting. It might be interesting. Plus, Nigel Farage made his debut in the Commons today. What did he have to say about a certain former Speaker of the House of Commons? Stay tuned.
Hi there, welcome back to the latest weather forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It is a wet day out there for many of us. Even where it's not raining persistently, there is the risk of thundery showers with low pressure sitting over Wales and southwest England, and these weather fronts moving north, and we've seen this transfer of persistent rain into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland through the day. Thundery showers continue to be a risk across East Wales into the Midlands, northwest England for the rest of the day. Could cause some issues in a few spots, but they'll be hit and miss. Showers continue as well in the south overnight. A lot of cloud cover as the rain pushes north into northern Scotland and continues across central and southern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. And that rains with many northern parts of the country as we begin Wednesday. But in the south, the rain less relentless. Still some showers around first thing. A lot of cloud cover as well. But the sun is trying to come through in one or two spots. Northern Ireland, though, southern and central Scotland seeing the persistent rain during Wednesday morning. Some heavy bursts in places. And the rain is starting to drive into the northeast of Scotland. That's going to be increasingly the area of concern for the rest of the day. So the rain becoming increasingly heavy and prolonged across northeast Scotland. In some spots, 30 to 50 millimetres, and in one or two of the worst on wettest areas across northeast Scotland, up to 80 or 90 millimetres of rain. That could cause some issues, some localised flooding. Yellow rain warning in force. Further south, we've still got some rain continuing across parts of Wales, southwest Scotland, Northern Ireland. Brighter skies in the far south and some warmth as the sun comes through, up to 23 or 24 Celsius. And into the evening, it's mostly fine for southern England and South Wales, whilst it's cloudier elsewhere, with that rain continuing in the far north. Friday, drier, brighter weather for many, but still the chance of a few showers.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. There are long queues on the M6 heading south towards Coventry. From the M42 to the Corley services, one lane remains coned off for emergency repair works, and long delays on the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25 each way between Potters Bar and the A10. There's heavy surface water across the roadworks on that stretch, not helping matters. In Essex, the A127 is closed London bound at the Dunton Junction following a crash. Also in Essex, just east of Harlow, the A414 remains shut between the Clock Tower roundabout and the Parkin Junction, the scene of a crash just north of the M11. West Sussex, south of Crawley, the A23 is shut just off the M23 following an accident involving a lorry. And of course, the A24 is closed northbound from the Bear Green roundabout all the way up to Leatherhead following that serious spillage this morning. And London Overground trains are suspended from Hackney Downs to Enfield Town and Cheshunt. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, this evening. Almost forgot my name there. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is Ben Habib, of course, and Tom Buick, too. It's been a good evening of debate, lots of disagreements. I don't think any agreement at all, perhaps. We'll find some, maybe, although that's not the point of this show, is it? We need to tease out the differences like Michelle does so well. Just on the issue of immigration, just for a second. Oh, GB Viewer, I don't know your name. He says, at some point, people will have had enough of this immigration issue. God knows what will happen. I fear we are not far from that point. I don't know exactly what you're suggesting, but I imagine you're suggesting that people will get very angry indeed. And Neil says, oh no, Bilam says, there are two ways, border enforcement and also no incentive to arrive. Yes, that probably is correct, I would say. But let's move on, because it's been a big day in the Commons, and the Reform 5, this seems to be their branding now, the Reform 5 made their grand entrance into Parliament today with what marks Nigel Farage's first day in the House of Commons. Here's what he had to say.
Brought tremendous dignity to the role as Speaker, so we absolutely endorse you entirely for this job. And it is, I must say, in marked contrast to the little man that was there before you and besmirched the office so dreadfully in doing his best to overturn the biggest democratic result in the history of the country. We support you, sir, fully.
Who on earth could he be referring to, Ben?
I don't. Burko?
I think it might be, yes. Tom, you saw that, you heard it. The rolling of the eyes behind, the big sighs from some of the people in there. He's going to cause some trouble, isn't he, Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, he is the proverbial fox in the chicken coop, isn't he? But I have to say, you know, as a Democrat, it was good to see Nigel there. You know, he was elected by his constituents, so he's there representing them. But importantly, he was standing in a chamber, let's be frank, where probably 90% of those MPs, both those coming for the first time and those returning, voted Remain. And quite a lot of those MPs, including, by the way, dare I say, many of those are on the Labour front bench now in government, were part of that appalling 2017 to 2019 Parliament.
Just on that,
where
the
they
whole
tried
cabinet are Remain voters, aren't they? The whole cabinet.
There isn't a single Brexit or avowed Brexit voter or you know, someone that supported Leave, as I did in 2016, from a Labour Party position. And that, I think, is actually one of the big stories of this election in many ways. And I think we can come on now to why Reform has got 5 MPs, is because, you know, the British people have got very long memories. They do remember how desperate that Parliament was, actually, in terms of the shenanigans that went on, not just with the Speaker, but also with members of Parliament of different parties who sought to... Do you remember the Surrender Act? You know,
the Benn Act.
The
Hilary
bill,
Benn,
yeah,
who is now Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
That was also called the Surrender Act, because... You know, I never thought, as someone that's a close watcher of British politics, that I would see a legislator literally pass a law that would set out on a piece of paper what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom could say to the President of the European Commission when the British people had voted us out and we were in the Article 50 negotiations in order to properly get out with the withdrawal agreement. I thought that was a shocking episode. And
I note that Lee Anderson is going to be the chief whip of the party. Not too many MPs to whip into shape. I'm sure he can keep 5 MPs, including himself, on track.
He's quite a big, burly sort of bloke, so he'll be able to make sure they do what
they did a bit of a photo shoot. Here we go. They did a bit of a photo shoot, and bless him, Lee, he struggles with the old smile for the camera.
Yeah.
Struggles to give us a grin. But there you go, big thumbs up outside the palace there.
But I just want to come back to what Tom was saying. Absolutely right. Parliament has remained in contempt of the vote for Brexit ever since 2016. And the schism people often describe that is in British politics is between the left and the right, and they see Labour being returned in what they regard as a thumping way as the United Kingdom moving to the left. It isn't at all. Labour's vote in this election actually went down compared to 2019. It's just that those who believed in a sovereign, independent, proud, prosperous United Kingdom are so fed up with politics that many of them didn't come out, who would traditionally vote Conservative. They stayed at home. But there are some angry folk out there who are perhaps not as angry as I am, but pretty angry, and they came out and they voted Reform UK, and we got 4.1 million votes, only 2.7 less than the Conservative Party, who got 24 times as many seats. And we got 600,000 more votes than the Liberal Democrats, and they got 72 seats.
Yes, I think considering the vote share versus the number of seats, there probably is quite a strong case to shake up our electoral system.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah.
Labour with a big majority now won't want to look at that. We're going to have to take a break very quickly. I'm going to get to some of your views on this because they're coming in over Reform and Nigel Farage's comments. Alan's got something to say. I'll get to Alan straight after this. We're also going to be seeing Keir Starmer, who's heading off to Washington. He's given a bit of an interview. We'll be there in a sec.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Well, we've got quite an extraordinary story to talk to you about now, because a triple amputee war hero is launching a bid to become the first to sail across the Pacific Ocean non-stop, solo and unsupported.
Craig Wood was blown up as a teenager by the Taliban in Afghanistan, but now he's hoping to change the perception of disabled people and raise money for other limbless veterans like himself. And Craig joins us now. Morning.
So, Craig, you are extraordinary. You are planning to take up to 80 days to sail from La Paz in Mexico to Japan.
Yeah.
How many miles is that?
It'll be over 6,000.
Amazing.
Amazing. And it will take you how long?
The minimum it's going to take me is 60 days. It could be up to 80. Yeah.
And that's on your own. You've done plenty of this before, haven't you? You've done lots of solo sailing.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of solo sailing, but not as big as this. It is the world's biggest ocean, after all.
And why that particular route?
I wanted it to be a challenge, not just for me, but for anyone.
Right.
So any able-bodied person can look at this and go, wow, that is difficult.
Yeah.
And so that was the main drive. Then it's become a bigger thing than that now. Now I'm raising money for charity, and I can truly inspire people to change their perception on what is possible for disabled people.
And if you don't mind, can we ask you what happened in 2009 in Afghanistan? What were the circumstances of your injury?
I was on a normal routine foot patrol. About 5 metres in front of me, a commando IED was triggered, and subsequently I became a triple amputee, both legs above the knee, left hand at the wrist, facial injuries, etc., etc.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yes, very quickly. I did promise I'd read out Alan's comment. He says, I don't know if people realise the indirect point that Nigel Farage made in the Commons today. He not only pointed out that Bercow tried to reverse Brexit, but used this to let the others in there, like Starmer's Labour and the rest, the Libs, the Greens, the SNP, the Cons, that they also tried to reverse the biggest vote in UK history. He knows it, we know it, and they now know it, hence the groans. Well, yes, perhaps there was some of that to that too. But we're going to bring you Keir Starmer, because he's been speaking to the media before this big summit in the United States. He's making his debut on the world stage.
My message is very, very clear that this NATO summit is an opportunity for allies to stand together, to strengthen their resolve, particularly in light of that appalling attack against Russian aggression. I'm pleased to have the early opportunity to affirm and reaffirm Labour's strong support, unshakable support for NATO. We're a founding member. It's now the 75th anniversary, but this is an opportunity to send that message in relation to Russian aggression wherever. But that attack last week was appalling, and so the message is even more important now than it was before.
And General Sir Patrick Sanders says that this is the most dangerous moment for the planet since 1945, and yet our army is depleted. You talk about action, not words, so it's not enough to say that you'll spend 2.5% on defence. For people to trust you, can you set a timeline on that today?
Well, the most important thing at the moment is to, at this NATO summit, recommit to our solidarity with and standing with Ukraine and discuss the practical plans for further action that we can take together in relation to Russian aggression. That is really important. That's the focus of the next few days. In relation to defence more generally, we will carry out our strategic review to look at the challenges, the capabilities, and on the back of that make further plans. I am committed to that 2.5% within our fiscal rules, but that strategic review needs to come first. allies. But today, tomorrow and the next day, is all about standing together with our allies, discussing practically how we provide further support for Ukraine and send a very, very clear message to Putin that we will stand against Russian aggression wherever it is in the world. Thank you.
Minister, thank you.
Well, there we go. The now Prime Minister on the tarmac answering a few questions. Rakesh has got in touch. You make me laugh. Why is Keir carrying a folder with him all the time? Kes says, makes him feel important. I mean, he is important now. He is the Prime Minister of this country, so presumably he has very important notes in there about what he's about to do at the NATO summit. But this strategic review, Ben, we hear a lot about strategic reviews. In the manifesto, there's lots about consultations and reviews and all of this. Absolutely no commitment to raising defence spending.
No, they haven't got the money. So he's made the promise he's going to kick the can down the road. But I thought that was an exceptionally vacuous speech, even for Starmer. He stood on the tarmac and spoke for 10 minutes at least, and all he said was, I'm going to continue our membership of NATO. That's effectively what he said. Big deal. What are your specific aims in Ukraine? You know, one of the things we don't hear from our politicians is, what are Britain's geopolitical aims in this war? What is it that serves the United Kingdom? We keep hearing about what it is that benefits Ukraine. Fine, I get that. I understand that. That's pretty binary. It's getting rid of Russia. But ours may be a more nuanced set of aims. And we haven't got a Prime Minister who's got the courage to actually say, this is what the United Kingdom wants. And we need to be talking to our American allies.
Presumably, he believes that backing Ukraine to the hilt is what's needed to keep the entirety of Europe, including our nation, safe, Tom. I mean, he spoke a lot. Yes, he did speak, you know, solidarity with Ukraine. Of course, we'd expect nothing less. They will discuss what further action can be taken. Of course, he didn't set out any specifics.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was very choreographed, wasn't it? And indeed, it was a pool journalist that asked the question, actually a very good question, which was more about the...
domestic defence.
About domestic defence, because, of course, there's the issue about our solidarity with Ukraine. We can talk about that. But actually, I think the real issue, and I think actually a lot of British people, whether they're in the armed forces or not, really care about this. I think intuitively, we know that our armed forces are really depleted. We know actually we've got the smallest military in terms of so-called manpower size since the times of Napoleon. We've got 15 frigates that have been mothballed, not because those frigates shouldn't and can be around the Mediterranean actually taking on, for example, those Houthi drone attacks, which is really affecting international shipping. It's because we're not hiring, we can't recruit people into the armed forces. Meanwhile, we've got 900,000 young people under the age of 25 who are not in education, training and employment, and 1 in 5 people who are on out-of-work benefits.
Well, I guess we're not going to see that national service anytime soon that Rishi Sunak promised.
But we have got a resource. We do have young people, frankly, that are not doing what they should be doing and could be pressed into our armed services.
Well, I'm terribly sorry, but that's going to have to be it.
Is it? Oh,
that's a great shame, because I have so much to say.
I know, you always have so much to say. So do you, Tom. It's been a lovely evening to spend with you. Thank you very much to my panel, Tom Buick and, of course, Ben Habib. Now, I'm going to be back tomorrow from midday on Good Afternoon Britain with Tom Harwood. But up next, it's Martin Dewbs.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome back to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Cloudy and damp in the north during the next 24 hours. Drier further south, still with some showers, however, and it's going to stay humid across southern parts of the UK, with humid air from the continent extending across many parts. But that means also a lot of cloud cover, continued risk of thunderstorms for the evening across East Wales into the Midlands and North West England before they ease overnight, and continued outbreaks of persistent rain for many other parts across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, although it stays cloudy overnight, it will be drier and it will be a mild night. Muggy in some spots, 15 or 16 Celsius during the start of the day. But for northern Scotland, where it's increasingly damp, especially the northeast, across parts of Aberdeenshire, that rain driving in on a brisk northeasterly breeze. Likewise, outbreaks of, at times, heavy rain continue across the central belt, southwest Scotland, Northern Ireland. But for England and Wales, it's drier, although not entirely dry as we start off Wednesday. A lot of low cloud around and some showers here and there. there. Now, those showers will increasingly move east and north through the morning. Brighter skies develop across southern England and South Wales, and it's going to be warm when the sun comes through, with temperatures reaching 23, 24 Celsius. Not feeling so warm across northeast Scotland, where that rain continues to pile up. And there is the risk of localised flooding with that rain, particularly across parts of Aberdeenshire into the Grampians, 50 to 80 millimetres in places. It's still there for the start of Thursday, albeit easing and pushing into the North Sea. Elsewhere across the UK, Thursday begins with, once again, a lot of cloud cover, but that cloud will break through during the day. Some showers will develop, but all in all, a drier day for many. Friday, likewise, a mix of bright spells and showers, and similar into the weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. There are long queues heading west of Glasgow on the M8. Now, a lorry broke down on the opposite side of the carriageway much earlier on in the Clyde Tunnel turn-off, although all restrictions have now been lifted. Queues back towards the Kingston Bridge. In Tyne and Wear, the A182 Washington Highway remains shut southbound following an accident. Long queues heading south towards Coventry on the M6, a lane shut just before the Corley services for emergency repairs, tailing back to the M42, that queue. And it's really slow as well on the M25 on the Hertfordshire stretch, partly due to the roadworks between the A10 and Potters Bar, but heavy flooded water not helping on that stretch. The A24 in Surrey remains shut northbound from the Bear Green roundabout all the way up to Leatherhead following a large spillage of diesel. In southeast London, Eltham High Street is closed following an accident, and London Overground trains remain suspended out of Hackney Downs to both Enfield Town and Cheshunt. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far, and it could be yours. Phil was the winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox. I just looked at my account and thought, oh my God, yeah, it's true, it's gone into my account. And if I can win it, anybody can win it.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
A very, very good evening to you. Welcome to GB.